Welcome back to Driftwood Stories, where the wind walks softly between trees and the night carries the scent of wildflowers and moonlight. Tonight we step quietly into the deep forest, past the edges of the map, where rivers sing and hooves leave no mark. This is the story of Artemis, goddess of the wild hunt, sister of the moon, and protector of all that moves gently in the dark. She was born of silence. She walked alone by choice. She raised her bow not to conquer, but to preserve. So close your eyes, let your breath slow like falling leaves, and follow the silver path that winds between stars. Chapter 1. Born beneath the branches. Before temples rose, before names were carved into stone, before the moon had a voice, there was only the sound of wind through trees, and the footsteps of a tired woman. Leto, daughter of Titans, once beloved by Zeus, now wandered alone, heavy with life, hunted by jealousy, and shunned by the lands of men and gods alike. The great Queen Hera, consumed with rage, had declared that no land under the sun could offer Leto refuge. No country, no island, no field dared defy that curse. Wherever Leto stepped, the ground recoiled, the rivers turned away. The towns closed their gates. For days she walked, her robes torn by brambles, her feet cracked by stone. She ate only wild fruit, drank dew from leaves. The life within her stirred, not weak, not restless, but waiting, steady, watchful. And just as her strength began to fade beneath the weight of her unborn children, she found it. A place no map remembered, a grove veiled in mist, where cypress trees stood like guardians and the moon filtered through the branches in silver threads. The earth there was quiet, not in fear but in welcome. This land was sacred but unclaimed, not under the sun, not touched by Hera's wrath, not yet known by the gods. Leto sank to her knees in the moss. Her breath was shallow, but her heart was full. She whispered thanks to the trees, to the stars, to the silence. And in that grove, beneath the sigh of leaves and the hush of midnight, she gave birth. First came Artemis. She did not cry. She did not flail. She opened her eyes, grey as riverstone, and stared upward, watching as the moon passed behind a veil of clouds. The wind paused. The animals of the grove stilled. A doe stepped softly from the trees and knelt beside Leto, her flank touching the woman's arm. An owl blinked from a low branch. Tiny lights, not fireflies but something older, hovered just above the forest floor. The grove had seen gods before, but not like this. Artemis did not reach for warmth or milk. She reached for the moonlight, her fingers curled toward it like petals, and the cypress trees, ancient and knowing, bowed ever so slightly in her direction. She was still a child, pink-cheeked, quiet, but already the wildness recognized her. She was of it. Then came her brother. Apollo, the golden, the shining, arrived like a burst of song. His first breath seemed to warm the grove. His cry rang through the canopy, and birds answered in kind. Where Artemis was silence, Apollo was flame, not to burn but to brighten. He kicked, he laughed, he filled the grove with his radiance. Twins, light and shadow. One looked outward, already watching the edge of the world. The other turned inward, already listening to the song beneath the leaves. Leto held them both, exhausted but smiling. She saw it even then, the balance they would one day become. But Artemis was the first. The forest knew it. Later the poets would say she was born with a bow in her heart and silver in her veins. That the moon dipped lower that night to look into her eyes, that the stars above shimmered just a little longer before dawn arrived. She was not crowned or claimed. She simply was, wild and whole, and from that night forward the wild world would never forget her. Chapter 2. The Twin and the Choice. In the years that followed their birth beneath the trees, Artemis and Apollo wandered through the golden days of youth, never far from one another, and yet never quite the same. Where Apollo sought sunlit courtyards and song, Artemis slipped into shadows, walking barefoot beneath the trees. He laughed loudly, argued with satyrs, chased comets across mountain tops. She moved like wind on water, quiet, clear and certain. She spoke less, but listened more. Both divine, both radiant. But their light fell differently. One morning, as the mist curled over the valley and dew clung to every blade of grass, Artemis sat high in the branches of a cedar tree. She watched her brother sparring with Hermes below, all flame and laughter and cleverness. They struck with practised swords, flinging jokes as fast as strikes. Artemis smiled, but did not descend. She had begun to feel it more and more, the pull. Not away from others in anger, but towards something deeper, something untouched. That night she wandered the forest alone. The moon followed her, casting silver shadows between the trees. A fox watched her from a hilltop. A doe walked in step beside her for a time, then faded into the brush. And when she reached a clearing where the stars spilled openly across the sky, she knelt and spoke aloud, not to any one god, but to the quiet itself. "Let me walk alone," she said, "not in sorrow, in freedom." The moonlight pulsed, soft and slow. "Let me hunt, not for sport, but to protect, to know, to balance." The wind stirred. "Let me guard the wild places. Let me guide the lost. Let me remain untouched, not because I cannot love, but because I am whole as I am." The grove held its breath, and then something answered, not in words, but in stillness. The trees leaned closer. The stars blinked once, as if in approval. A soft silver shimmer danced across the grass at her feet. A vow had been made. The next morning she returned to Olympus. Apollo greeted her with a grin, tossing sunlight in her direction. "You missed the race," he teased. "I was running," she replied softly, but in a different direction. He tilted his head, studying her, and though he said nothing, he understood. From that day on they grew apart, but not apart. Apollo lit the stage. Artemis watched from the wings. He gathered voices. She gathered shadows. He touched hearts. She guarded souls. And the moon, ever watchful, ever wandering, became her companion, not her mirror, her equal. Chapter 3, The First Moonrise. It happened on a night when the sky was clearest and no one was looking. The gods were busy, weaving fate, forging storms, holding court in halls of marble and flame. Mortals lit fires below, unaware that something sacred was about to stir far above them. Artemis had wandered deeper into the world than ever before. She passed beyond fields, beyond paths, into woods where even nymphs dared not tread. Here the trees were ancient, twisted and towering, their roots knotted like the fingers of sleeping giants. She walked in silence, her bare feet leaving no mark. In her hand, a bough of pale yew strung with moonlight, not yet tested, not yet loosed. All around her the forest breathed, slow and steady. Owls blinked, mice froze mid-scurry. Even the wind softened, as if to avoid breaking the moment. She came upon a cliff that overlooked a dark lake, its surface smooth as polished silver. Stars glittered above like scattered seeds, but it was the moon that held her gaze, full and glowing, rising slow as breath behind the trees. She climbed the cliff and stood there, not waiting but ready. As the moon reached its highest point, she raised her bow, not to shoot, not to aim, simply to meet it. The moonlight caught the curve of the wood shimmering along the string, and in that moment something shifted. The moon paused, the stars stilled, and Artemis rose. Not her body, but her spirit, her place, her purpose. She closed her eyes and felt it. The rhythm of creatures sleeping below, the breath of wolves pacing in shadows, the ripple of time where no clock ticked, only leaf, only paw, only wing. She was not above them, she was with them, a guardian not from fear, but from knowing. From that moment on, the moon became hers, not to command, but to accompany. It moved with her. It waxed when she hunted, waned when she rested. It knew her footsteps and lit the path before them, and the creatures of the wild began to follow. Not out of obedience, out of recognition. She became a constellation of presence, moving through glades, across streams, past sleeping towns, never seeking worship, only watching. They say that from then on, no predator ever struck without Artemis knowing. No lost soul wandered without her gaze somewhere in the trees. She did not crown herself. The night did, and the first moonrise was never forgotten. Chapter 4, The White Stag. It began with a rustle, just a breath of movement in the undergrowth, nothing more. But Artemis, already deep in the forest, stilled at once. She had been walking since before dawn, her bow slung across her back, a quiver of silver-tipped arrows at her hip. The forest was awake but calm. Birds trilled softly overhead. Ferns shivered underfoot. But then, in the space between two heartbeats, everything went quiet. She knew the sound before she turned. Hoofbeats, light, almost imagined. Then she saw it, a stag, tall and impossibly white, its coat like woven cloudlight, its eyes the colour of fog on a winter river. It stood just beyond the trees, head lifted, watching her, unmoving, She did not draw her bow. She didn't need to. The creature wasn't prey. It was a summons. Without a sound, the stag turned and walked into the trees, and Artemis followed. She did not run, nor did she speak. She moved as she had been born to, fluid, effortless, each footfall part of the earth's own rhythm. The stag was fast, but not unreachable, always just ahead, never vanishing entirely. They passed through shadow and light, groves where golden leaves drifted like snow, ravines where silence hung thick as velvet, streams that ran cold as starlight. And all the while the forest changed. The deeper she followed, the older it seemed. Trees curved toward one another like whispered secrets. Moss clung to ancient stone, and time softened, became a dream. At last the stag led her to a clearing, circular and untouched. In its centre stood a tree unlike any she had ever seen, white as bone, leafless but alive. Its branches curled upward like open hands. The stag stepped into the clearing and bowed its head. Artemis followed suit, slowly, and in that moment something passed between them. Not words, not thoughts, but a shared stillness, a knowing. This was not a creature to be hunted, it was a keeper of the deep wild, of memory, of balance. It had not come to be taken, it had come to teach. And Artemis, goddess though she was, listened. When she finally left the glade, the stag did not follow. It remained beneath the pale tree, as if returning to some older purpose. From that day forward, Artemis bore a new symbol, the image of the white stag carved into the wood of her bow. Not as a trophy, as a reminder that not all things wild must be touched. Some are meant to lead you deeper into yourself. Chapter 5. The Cry of the Nymph. The forest had learned to trust her. Foxes curled near her fire. Birds perched quietly in her path. Even the wolves, sharp-eyed and lean, walked beside her at dusk, their paws falling in rhythm with hers. But one night a cry pierced the trees, not the cry of a creature caught in claw or trap, but something deeper, human, heart wound deep. Artemis turned toward it without hesitation. She followed the sound through dark branches and cold air, her silver bow in hand, the moonlight trailing close behind her like a cloak. And in a grove of yew and shadow she found her. A nymph collapsed beneath a tree, her gown torn, her shoulders shaking. Artemis knelt beside her. She did not ask what had happened. She knew. The air carried it. The ground felt it. Even the trees leaned inward, their branches heavy with sorrow. A man had passed this way, a king, drunk on power and hunger, who believed that the wild could be taken, that beauty could be owned. The nymph looked up through tears, her voice barely a whisper. I begged the trees to swallow me. Artemis touched her forehead gently. You are the trees, she said. You are not broken. You are sacred. And she stood. She did not scream. She did not rage. She walked, calmly, clearly, following the trail of the one who had done this. He had left horseshoe marks, boots pressed too deep. He had broken branches and scattered ash. He had brought his noise into a place that had no use for it. And now the forest rose to meet him. When Artemis found him, the king was camped beneath a cypress, boasting to his men about a spirit girl who had fled like a deer. He turned as she approached, mouth already curling into a smirk, but Artemis said nothing. She raised her bow, not quickly, not rashly, and the forest held its breath. One arrow, silver-tipped, not aimed at his heart, aimed at his memory, it flew through the air and struck his shadow. The fire dimmed, his voice fell silent. And though he lived, he would never forget the feeling, the weight of being seen, truly seen, and found unworthy. He stumbled from the grove, wordless and pale, and his men followed without a sound. When Artemis returned to the nymph, the girl was still, but now her breath had steadied, her hands had stopped trembling, the moonlight touched her face gently, and the wild, once violated, began to heal. Artemis stayed with her until dawn. She left no mark, took no praise, but from that day forward the trees whispered a new name for her. Protector, Chapter 6, The Arrow That Waited. The silver bow of Artemis had never missed its mark. Each arrow, loosed with grace and silence, flew like moonlight through the trees, swift, clean, final. But she did not draw often. Her power was not in the strike, but in knowing when it was needed, and sometimes when it was not. One dusk, as the sun fled west and the moon lifted her pale face over the hills, Artemis returned to a glade she had once made sacred. It was a quiet place, where deer came to drink and wolves came only to rest. A hidden spring trickled through mossy rocks, and her own footprints never disturbed the path. She had blessed it long ago, a place of peace, not pursuit. But that night something was wrong. The air felt broken. The birds did not sing. The fox did not blink from its den. The scent of fire lingered where no flame belonged. She moved swiftly, and in the heart of the glade she found him. A hunter, lean, cloaked, eyes sharp with cruelty, setting snares in the roots of trees she had blessed. Around his belt hung the feathers of owls, the teeth of wolves, the broken horns of a stag. He did not see her at first, but when he did, he laughed. "They say you walk alone, lady," he said. "Perhaps now I'll be the one to tame you." The moon narrowed. The trees fell still. Artemis raised her bow. The arrow gleamed, sharp and silver, not with anger, but with clarity. But just as her fingers drew back to release, she saw it, a tremble in his stance, a flicker in his gaze, not pride, not challenge, fear, and something else. Behind him, a boy no older than 12 stepped from the shadows, the hunter's son, thin, wide-eyed, carrying not a weapon but a flask of water. "Father?" Artemis paused. The arrow waited. The man turned, startled, and in that moment Artemis saw them both, one who had done wrong, and one who still might choose right. She lowered her bow. The hunter staggered back in disbelief. "Why?" She stepped forward, gaze steady. "Because this is not the lesson." She turned to the boy and placed the arrow in his hands. "This does not belong here," she said. "Neither does he—" The boy nodded, once, small and serious. He would remember this night long after his father forgot. He would speak of it not as a warning, but as a turning, and when they left the glade, the forest seemed to breathe again. Artemis remained until dawn. She dipped her fingers in the spring, whispering new protection into its waters. She hung her bow on a low branch, letting it rest. Not every threat must end in flight. Not every wound must be struck. Sometimes the greatest strength is the one that waits. Chapter 7. The Grove of Silent Steps. There came a time when Artemis no longer wandered each night, not because she had grown weary, but because she had found the place her spirit had always known. It was a glade deep within the wilds, unreachable by horse or road, hidden by the folds of the land like a pearl in a sleeping shell. She found it while following the stars, not in search of anything, only walking, letting her feet find their own path. The trees here were pale and tall, their trunks mottled like moonstone. The wind made no sound. Even the birds, usually eager to greet her with song, perched quietly in the branches, as if honouring the hush. She stepped into the clearing and felt it at once. This place was waiting for her. The ground beneath her feet was soft and damp with moss. A spring trickled through the stones in a hush so low it was almost thought. White flowers bloomed between ferns without scent or show, and above it all the moon sat wide and open, not watching but with. She removed her sandals, laid down her bow, and knelt in the centre of the grove. "Let this place remain untouched," she whispered. "Not barren, but unclaimed." Her hands moved across the soil, her fingers tracing ancient shapes in the moss. "Let no sword be raised here. Let no name be shouted. Let this be for those who need not to be seen." A ripple passed through the air. The wind stirred, not roughly, but like breath after weeping. Something old and kind settled into the stones, and from that day on the grove became sacred. No traveller could stumble into it by accident. No hunter could find it, no matter how clever. Only those who needed it, the forgotten, the wounded, the wild at heart, were ever drawn near. The animals knew. Deer gave birth beneath its trees. Owls taught their young from its branches. Nymphs rested beside the spring and sang not to be heard, but to remember their own names. Even gods did not enter uninvited. They respected this space, not because of Artemis's power, but because of its absence. There were no altars, no offerings, no echo, only presence, and sometimes, in the softest hours before dawn, Artemis herself would return. She would walk its circle barefoot, her cloak trailing behind her like mist. She would sit beneath the moon and let the world drift through her, not fixing, not judging, just being. The grove became known in time by those who told stories in whispers. They called it the Grove of Silent Steps, a place not of escape, but of belonging. Chapter 8. Beneath the moon's gaze. Night falls gently over the world. In the cities, lamps flicker and voices soften. In the hills, wolves raise their heads toward the stars, not to howl, but to listen. The trees rustle like pages of an unwritten story, and high above, the moon rises full, ancient, silver, ever steady. And she is there, Artemis, not in marble, not in hymn, but in motion, walking the ridgeline above the forest, her bow slung across her back, her breath in time with the earth's. She does not need to speak. The world knows her. She watches over a fox den tucked into the roots of an old pine. She pauses at the edge of a stream where a girl whispers her secrets into the water. She lays a hand on the bark of a tree split by lightning, not to heal it, but to say, "You are still whole." The moon follows her, but not above, beside. And when she stops at last, it is on a rise where all the forest can be seen, valleys and glades, rivers and cliffs, the breath and body of the wild. She closes her eyes and listens. No wind, no bird call, only presence. She kneels, and the moonlight gathers around her like a cloak. Some say she sleeps there still, between moments, between breaths, never resting, but never rushed. Others say she walks even now, across distant fields and forgotten trails, where no name is known and no path is marked. But all agree on this. Where there is stillness, she is near. Where there is wildness, she watches. And where the moon casts silver light upon the sleeping earth, Artemis is home.